Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is not, as you might find out, Craft of the Cards. This is actually a new show I'll be doing. I have no idea what my hopefully pithy series name is going to be. You'll probably figure out when you clicked on the video. But yeah, as of the recording of this, I have no idea what I'm going to call this. This is a new show I'll be doing where I mostly, off the cuff, theorize about various aspects of the Yu-Gi-Oh! World. My first theory, and something I want to cover, and something I've been thinking about for a little while, is a fairly interesting aspect of the series, one that I often feel gets kind of unfairly brushed aside with some pretty boring reasoning. And this is, of course, as you can probably see from the title, is why is dueling, the card game and everything, so important to the series, and why everyone seems to resolve them and their problems through what Konami still insists are children's card games. I'll be limiting my discussion to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, though. I'm avoiding 5Ds because, on the one hand, I know the most about Yu-Gi-Oh! And GX. I watched a fair amount of 5Ds, but I never finished it. And beyond that, once you hit 5Ds, it starts to become a question of why law enforcement uses motorcycles when I'm pretty sure, though I'm not entirely sure, they are ostensibly still holograms and not like hard light things that show up in not 5Ds, Arc 5. There we go. For some reason I blanked on that. Before we go into it, though, a quick note on the quality. You can probably tell that the audio quality isn't what you're usually used to. My voice will probably sound a little different because I was too lazy to bring well, no, not too lazy, but I'm away from my usual setup at the moment, and I don't have access to my mic. And beyond that, the visual quality will hopefully get better. But again, I'm away from my usual setup. I don't have access to the stuff I normally would to make this video, but I figured this is more casual anyway, and we'll just go with it. So, before we go on into the theory proper, though, we do have to do a little explanation of what's known as dualist and Watsonian reasoning. So, the terms dualist and Watsonian reasoning come from Sherlock Holmes. Watsonian reason coming from Sherlock's faithful companion and Tared's sex partner, if you believe the internet, Dr. John Watson, and dualist coming from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle. Sorry about that. The author of the series. So the term dualist reasoning refers to reasoning for events in the series given from a point outside the text. So reasons why something's happening in the series is that the writer needed it to. So, for example, in the Doctor Who fandom, there is something called the unit dating controversy, which mostly revolves around a serial known as Modern Undead, I'm pretty sure, in which it's revealed that a character, Brigadier Alastair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, retired in 1976, while the first encountered instance of the character turns out to have been in 1979. So the dualist reasoning for this is that someone fucked up, and they didn't, learn the dates properly, so there's a bit of an issue, and now we have a continuity problem. This happens a lot in fiction, and while there's interesting ways to try and resolve these, they almost always take place from a Watsonian perspective. So a Watsonian perspective is where reasoning for events is given inside the narrative, because it comes from Watson, who's inside the narrative, whereas dualist reasoning comes from the author's name, so it's outside the narrative. So yeah, a Watsonian perspective is where reasoning for events is given from within the narrative. So if we were to use the previous example, we might say that the Doctor crossed over into an alternate universe, and therefore the time gets wibbly-wobbly and things are different. So, dualist reasoning is from a point outside the text, because the writer needed to, and Watsonian reasoning is from inside the text or the work. It's the reason in universe why something happens. So, with that out of the way, let's get to the main question of this video. Why is dueling the answer to literally everything in Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, the dualist reasoning is quite simple. They need to sell cards to little kids, and the best way to do that is to constantly show them off in big, flashy battles. having Jaden or Yugi or literally whichever protagonist to go up against various supernatural things and fellow duelists to show off all the new archetypes Konami is releasing to those eager little children with access to their parents' money is a great way to get publicity out and make them seem cool. It obviously worked. All I needed to see was Jaden showing off Flame Wingman or Chaz showing off the VXWYZ cannon, VWXYZ cannon maybe, or Arm Dragon level 7, and trust me, I was hooked. I was in. Now, it's easy to figure out the duelist reasoning of why everything resolves through duels. It's because Konami needs to make money. Today, though, we will be looking at the Watsonian reasoning of why everything resolves through duels in-universe. So, they actually do give pretty good reasons through a lot of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series as to why the bloody trading card game is so vital for the success of whatever plot-related thing they care about. It mostly ends up going to the fact that the series draws very heavily from supernatural elements and supernatural themes, and the relatively rules-light version of Yu-Gi-Oh! At the start actually aided this quite a lot, in my perspective. It does get much, much harder to figure out why people still stick to these rules, especially in GX. So the initial duel with Kaiba makes a lot of sense in a slightly psychotic way, given that Kaiba's kind of a mad bastard, in that, he wanted to prove his dominance and his whole thing was getting the bloody trading card in the first place, so you can argue that it was arrogance that made him want to duel Yugi and, therefore lost. And the whole tournament was organized by Pegasus as a cover for him trying to get the mystical powers of the Millennium Artifacts. Why he chose to use the dueling tournament could be explained as the fact that he owns the bloody game, and assumedly he knew that Yugi and his friends were into it, so, I don't know, maybe he wanted to toy with them by being like, hey, look, I'm also really good at this game, and I will crush you at the card game you people play. But, yeah. So, a reason for a lot of the early stuff is most of the series as the whole ties to the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Comes from ancient Egyptian spirit battles. So, diving a bit into explanations of how Yu-Gi-Oh! Works with the spirit battles is that in Yu-Gi-Oh! The in-universe card game started out as a way of battling various spirits against each other, because ancient Egyptian sorcerers couldn't settle their disputes using rock, paper, scissors. They had to use monsters. So yeah, the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Took a lot more of the supernatural stuff, and that's why it explains mostly why people do battle with duel monsters, because it's emblematic of the existing power games they played in order to succeed, and the Ka-Ba relationship already gives some precedent as to how physical effects might manifest on the real world with the shadow games. So the reason why people like Malik and Baccarat and literally whatever other villains exist in the series is that, well, it's how things were in the past, and most of them have alternate personalities that seem pretty okay with continuing it just in, the modern day. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Mostly makes sense. If we look at the arcs, they mostly deal with supernatural stuff, or tournaments where it's various people who are really into the card game and they all decide to participate because they felt like it and, their friends are in it, or there was some prize that they needed. And it makes sense to use the modern version of the rules in that they still hold the power of the ancient Egyptian games, especially once you put in stuff like the Shadow games. The Orichalcos arc is the only real one, which might be a question as to why dueling is used, considering that darts probably could have just sealed people regardless. But my theory for that is actually, considering that he fought duel monster spirits and in the past, and he might have just figured it was a fun way to collect souls. The Orichalcos arc is the only one that's kind of out there, though, into why everybody uses duels to settle things. GX, however, is quite a different beast, though. While Yu-Gi-Oh! Was fundamentally a kids' show that had darker elements, GX was much more lighthearted, at least at first, and then it transitioned into this just ultimate edge that carried over into the initial bits of 5e, which, by the way, as a kid, that tonal shift blew my mind. I was like, my gosh, everybody's dying and people are gone, and then eventually I managed to watch all the Japanese stuff after and realized everybody came back, so I got kind of annoyed. But yeah, so while the show has its fair share of supernatural elements, GX, and it also contains many instances where the non-supernatural duels seem to have effects on real life. So while some of it can be put down to probably how realistic some of the holograms seem to have become, with like dust being kicked up and explosions sounding off when powerful monsters attack, it becomes much harder to figure out why the physical effects carry over, especially in some of the early duels when, you know, there's no real supernatural stuff going on. It's just people having a card game. The biggest example of this is in the duel between Jaden and Alexis fairly early on in the series. We see a physical effect from elemental hero Thunder Giant shocking Dr. Crowler, who's in the water at the time and peeping. So we're not yet at to the point where we have hard light holograms taking up physical space and generating effects, so it seems weird that the abilities of the hologram can be conducted through water, and it's always been this weird kind of halfway point in the series as to whether the monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Have actual physical effects if they're not explicitly stated, because they can seem to have that sometimes. My own theory for this is that powerful duelists, like the ones shown throughout the series, so Jaden and his pals and all the people they usually fight, are able to tap into a bit of that mystical heritage that surrounds duel monsters. It's heavily implied that each duel monsters card, or at least some of them more explicitly, contain card spirits drawn from the various dimensions of Yu-Gi-Oh! And from that, I hypothesize that each spirit is capable to be drawn out a bit by powerful duelists. It might be the case that also Jaden himself, being a reincarnation of the Supreme King, has a particular ability to draw out the energy of duel monsters and make at least some of their effects minorly physical. But yeah, moving on in the series, though, we do kind of transition to a very different way of looking at things. So, for example, there's something especially that shows up a lot in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is dueling energy, which is kind of a dumb concept, but we'll roll with it. So this is actually used for quite a bit throughout the series. Kagamaru needs to use it. The reason he sets up the duels in the first place with the Shadow Riders is that he sealed away the Sacred Beast cards a while ago, and he needs powerful, like, dueling presence along with the 7 keys in order to unseal them and thereby be able to, like, gain the power of youth once he's absorbed a bunch of duel monster spirits. So once you get into that supernatural stuff, it becomes a lot easier to understand. But what is dueling energy kind of becomes the issue there. It's used for other stuff as well in the series. Yubel and Viper use it. That's the whole thing with, like, the bio bands in the, I think, 3rd season when they're messing around with dual energy to try and transport people, because Viper thought it would bring back his kid, but then Yubel wanted to bring everybody into the other dimension so she could sleep with Jaden or whatever it was. My own hypothesis as to where dueling energy comes from is that it does have something to relate with the spirit energy that surrounds Yu-Gi-Oh! It's that Ba and Ka clashing that makes it such a powerful energy source. It interacts in funny ways, and even, you know, relatively weak duelists generate some form of this. Once they put themselves more and more into the card game, once they get more and more involved in it, then you start seeing this collection of spirit energy. You start seeing this accumulation of metaphysical power, and this allows it to do all sorts of fun things, like shift you across dimensions and all sorts of wacky stuff. And apparently if you collect enough of it with, like, the Sacred Beast cards, it would make you immortal, like it does with Kagamaru. So another point in GX where it starts to get a bit squirrelier is once they are transported to the Duel Monsters spirit world. Why the dual spirits use decks, dual discs, life points, and literally anything to do with the game as a whole, why don't they just use a very kind of rules-light, spirits-focused version of the game? My take is on it, though, that it's kind of the physical world affecting the dual spirit world. So in Season 4 of GX, we get an explanation by Night Shroud as to, like, how the world works. And of course, because it's Yu-Gi-Oh!, he uses a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card to represent it, that the front of the card represents this kind of the dual monsters world, like the spirit world and the human world together. So those form, like, the above world. And then the backside of the card represents like the world of darkness or whatever. So my take is on it that once humans start to draw more and more from it, and once they started to like, formalize it down to a set of rules, that affected the spirit monsters world. Like they started to get more of these concepts, and eventually they themselves developed this concept of duel. Like they copied the concept of dueling and they took it into themselves, and that's why all of these duel monster spirits duel. And why they, follow the human rules to the game rather than just summoning up an army of spirits and just going murder them. And, the same reason they duel makes sense, because it's a formalization of, like, ancient spirit battling rules, and once you get, good enough people fighting, it becomes like an actual spirit battle and all. So this probably actually should have gone before we talked about Season 3 and the Duel Monster Spirit World, but talking about Season 2 and why the Light of Destruction especially, and the Gentle Darkness, the, things that possess Sartorius and that Jaden has access to, why the fuck they use duels? Because these are not connected to the spirit world in any way. They're not, like, embedded into the human culture. They're not in that kind of initial loop of like the humans and the like dual monster spirits world. They're just like a space virus that exists in some bleeding anus out on the edge of the known universe. It does get kind of squirrely there. The only reason I've managed to think of, even remotely, is that it might tie back to Jaden and Yubel, as all things fucking do in the series. So Yubel was a dual monster spirit. For those of you who don't know, So Yubel was a dual monster spirit. She was connected to Jaden because she was like his protector. And eventually stuff happened. They were meant to fight the Light of Destruction, but things happen, reincarnation happens, and then Jaden, the kid, ends up with a Yubel card. How he got it, nobody knows. Maybe she just showed up in a booster pack one day. But she shows up and she acts as a spirit, like she protects him, and she starts getting all weird and possessive, but she's not. She's, like, at that point in the series, she's just kind of overprotective rather than being, batshit crazy. She's minorly batshit crazy. She caused one of his friends to, like, go into a coma or whatever. But eventually he decides, hey, we'll put her in a capsule along with, like, this contest that I won with these Neo-Spatian cards, and we'll launch it into space so that nothing can be done again. But my theory there then is that the Light of Destruction encountered Yubel, and it corrupted her, and that's why she's all bug nuts crazy, and why she does that whole psychotic plan to transport Jaden into the dual spirits world and then break him slowly so that they can be in a codependent relationship forever. But yeah, so my idea is that since Yubel is a dual monster spirit, and since I assume by that point dual monsters had already started to interact very heavily with the human world, and they started, this is well past the point where YuGiOh and his pals start to kind of repopularize the game, and when Pegasus starts it. So the Light of Destruction then learns about YuGiOh and kind of recognizes the power that it has in terms of the metaphysical stuff, especially as it relates to kind of like staking your soul on the line if you get powerful enough duelists fighting each other. So it decided to adopt that as a way of, like, getting people's souls and murdering them. So, I think that's about it with regards to why dueling seems to be used. It does really all just tie back to the fact that it is very heavily related to the soul and to this weird, wonderful realm of, like, spirits and magic and stuff. So in the original series, almost everything that involved YuGiOh was either a direct tournament or why it was or directly supernatural. In GX, initially you have this kind of dual academy bit where, people are meant to be dueling each other and combating each other and, trying to leap up the academy's rankings so they can be, like, #1 and all that. So that explains why a lot of them duel, because they're all super into it. It's like a shared thing that they have, so they don't have to go, like, box me or whatever, or like try and beat me. It's just like, no, I'm better at this game than you, you fucking scrub. I will destroy you 1v1 me, bro. And then once you get into the later series, it does start getting more supernatural again. We start seeing people wanting to use dueling energy, which is theoretically created by what happens when, you know, you fight each other in this metaphysical power, this kind of even an extremely truncated version of like a spirit battle. We see Duel Monster's spirits starting to take influence from the human world, and we see the Light of Destruction as well kind of learn about this power and learn that like this soul battle can take place with humans. So hopefully that roughly makes sense. Please do put discussion in the comments below. I'm pretty sure I missed stuff. I probably did. Again, GX is the series I know the best. The original Yu-Gi-Oh series I did watch, but you know, not in my childhood, so it isn't burned into the nostalgia centers of my brain. So yeah, if I did miss anything, and if you'd want to maybe bring up some alternate theories as to why people seem to really like dueling as a thing in the series, please do leave it in the comments below. No. So thank you very much. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos. And without further ado, this is Nuke, signing out. Have a good one. Oh fuck, I could call it Duel Theory.